What's happening, folks? Back with another reaction, back with some more punk rock, back with some more Bad Religion, and indeed we're back with another tune from their 8085 compilation. Mentioned it before, a huge fan of this compilation. I really do love that early kind of raw, gritty, hardcore sound they had in the early 80s, even if I love their slightly more polished, melodic hardcore sound that they developed later even better. We're going to listen to a tune. It was written in the early 80s, might as well have been written in 2022. This is a tune called White Trash Second Generation. This is a tune about a number of things, but it's about the extreme right and far-right, bigoted, white supremacist sort of ideas and the way that they are passed down to a younger generation, which, you know, generally speaking, younger generations you would be less inclined to think would fall into patterns of bigotry and ignorance and so on. But ultimately, because of the environment and the sort of influences that they grew up with, these young people grow up to be white supremacist and far-right extremists and so on. And again, you know, it feels very of the moment and prescient given that this was written about 40 years ago. But ultimately, it's about specifically the way in which, like, certain families, certain blue-collar families, which again, you might think they'd be less inclined to vote for Republicans who historically have been about trickle-down economics and giving tax breaks to billionaires and so on. The way in which some blue-collar families will grow up where, let's say, the dad is at night kind of drunk and, you know, shouting at the TV and being angry at people that Fox News are telling him to be angry at, and, you know, getting more and more convinced that they need to move and get out of here, you know, with this suburban, like, we need to get out of these cities because, you know, these awful brown-colored people they're changing everything about our country and so on. And the mom might be checked out and just kind of like, you know, either right along for the ride with the dad, or at the very least doesn't challenge anything he says because she doesn't want to like rock the boat and so on. So the kid grows up thinking that these attitudes and these opinions and these values, for lack of a better word, are normal, and ultimately begins to embrace these bigoted ideas and white supremacy and so on. And again, the way in which some of these ideas are passed along, which, you know, the song talks about, like this pretty fascist in blonde hair draped in red, white, and blue, passing along these awful ideas which are making these people mad and making them, in some sense, go against the very policies and institutions which might actually help them in their socioeconomic condition. So it's ultimately about the way in which young people in these situations, in these families, in these cultural milieus, end up having their brains and their perspectives warped to be full of hatred and anger for other people that aren't like them, and as well as other people that are actually similar to them in many ways and share a lot of their same situations, but because of some phenotypic difference or because Fox News told them that these immigrants are coming to take their jobs and so on, they just get more and more angry at what they perceive as, you know, this assault on their own identity. So yeah, it's a really interesting song. As I said, I feel like it's very prescient. Could have been written 40 years later. So yeah, here we go. This is White Trash Second Generation from the compilation album 8085. I'll admit, as I sit here, I'm not quite sure which album or which release it's originally from, so give me 1 second here. Okay, so tracks 1 through 14 are How Could Hell Be Any Worse. So this is from their first album, right? This is from their 1982 album, How Could Hell Be Any Worse. So here we go. White Trash Second Generation, heard here on the 8085 compilation.
Wasted children, it's like eyes, blood and sweat, we socialize, broken home, from the Jacob,
Beer-stained dad, compliant mom. And then as they grow up, they have this sense that we gotta cleanse the nation.
Oh,
Christian ethics. I couldn't hear what that second phrase was, but then shoved down our throats as the American dream. I wonder if they've played this in recent years. I haven't seen them for a long time. I wonder if they've, carted this one out again, like, hey, this is still relevant, more so even. Again, I mentioned it when I reacted to, what was it, a Propaganda song, maybe State Lottery, but I was mentioning in one of my recent punk rock reactions that, like, one of the consequences of the sort of rise of, like, far-right, like, MAGA extremism is that, white nationalism and sort of white supremacy have been mainstreamed by the far right. And, that whole, you remember that rally where, a woman was killed by a far right extremist who drove his car into a crowd of people, that Unite the Right rally? Well, that was the whole point, right? Like, uniting mainstream conservatives with farther right and the alt-right and so on. So, I constantly think that, like, when it comes to the normalization of extreme forms of cultural bigotry, we're actually in a worse place now than we were 40 years ago. Because again, when you have the President of the United States, the previous one, retweeting a follower of theirs shouting white power at another person and seeing nothing wrong with that, and people on that president's side making excuses for it and saying it's in no way indicative of anything bad or whatever. I mean, we've truly entered crazy land. So I think the song is as prescient as ever, and I think it needs to be heard. So let me know what you think. Let me know if this one is one you're fond of. As I mentioned, I didn't have the original, like, albums, and indeed I didn't hear this even until maybe like 96 or 97. As I said, I discovered Bad Religion in the mid-90s, a year or two after discovering Propaganda, and then I think, what was next? I think Dead Kennedys, and then maybe Subhumans, and then maybe Bad Religion. I'm not sure. It was all around the same time. I know Propaganda was first. Nevertheless, when I heard this album, I was really impressed by it, because I think I mentioned when I was in the mid-90s, I was like a 16, 17-year-old. I was very proud that I was spending a lot of time listening to early 80s punk, because I felt like I love the stuff now, and I know my favorite band, Propaganda, they just got started a few years ago, whatever, but to me, I get why, this came after the stuff from the 80s. I just really was keen to hear a lot of early 80s punk rock, whether it be the Subhumans, Dead Kennedys, or indeed Bad Religion. So yeah, this one I've always been very fond of, and I think it has some really important messages that perhaps need to be heard as much now as ever. So let me know what you think. Thank you for listening and watching. I do appreciate it. Have a good day, have a good night, and I'll see you next time. Peace.